I'd like to call together the Santa Barbara County Association of Governments meeting for January 16th. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Director Williams?
Here.
Hartman? Here. Adam? Here. Levanino? Here. Clark? Here. Perotti? Murillo? Here. Toussaint? Andrezek? Here. Mosby? Here. Rubalcaba? Here. Patino? Here. And Chair Hart?
Here. Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You know, before we get started, I just would like to express my thanks and gratitude to past Chair Patino for her service in the role of SBCAG Chair. Mayor Patino has been serving the community of Santa Barbara County and Santa Maria in particular for many, many years. She is a former teacher, and her experience as a public school teacher comes through in her leadership style for the community, because she has a great way in handling people in difficult situations with poise and grace and civility, most importantly civility. And Alice and I have worked together for many, many years, and I have really treasured and valued our long-term relationship. And I just want to say that your service as our chair this past year has been another great example of how you bring people together and treat people with respect in every situation, and give an opportunity for all diverse voices to be heard. And I think the result of that has been a very collegial board that's working super productively with our staff and the community, and it's something that I think you should be really proud of, and we are really grateful for your service and your leadership on SBCAG. So thank you, Alice. Do we have any public comment? This is the item 3 on our agenda, is public comment on items that are not on our agenda. Is there any comment today?
Chair Hart, we have no public comment in Santa Barbara.
Great. We're next to the consent calendar, and I know that Director Williams will need to recuse himself from items 4C and D. Are there any items that directors would like to pull off the consent calendar? Okay, well then we are ready to take a motion. Excuse me, Director Williams.
I just need a separate vote because I need to recuse myself off of two of the items. C and D.
We'll start with a motion for the balance of the consent calendar
So
without
moved.
C and D. Okay.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded by Director Murillo and seconded by Director Patino. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
I'm sorry, Chair Hart. We need to ask for public comment
Oh, excuse me, thank you.
for the consent.
Is there anybody that'd like to comment on the consent calendar items? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Oppose and abstain. Matter carries unanimously. And now we need a motion for items 4C and 4D. Director Adam?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Is there any public comment?
No, Chair Hart, but I do believe I need to read them into the record.
Okay, do that too.
Thank you. Item 4C, Highway 101 Carpentry to Santa Barbara, segments 4A to 4E. 4C1, approve and authorize the chair to execute amendment number 2 to the agreement with Point C LLC for corridor advisor services in support of the Highway 101 Carpentry to Santa Barbara project, segment 4A to 4E, to increase the cost by $50,000 for a total amount not to exceed $375,000 without a change to the period of performance from June 27th, 2017 through June 30th, 2021. And 4C2, approve and authorize the executive director to, in accordance with the agreement, to suspend performance and to make immaterial amendments upon review and concurrence with legal counsel. 4D, Highway 101 Carpentry to Santa Barbara, segments 4A to 4E. 4D1, approve and authorize the chair to execute amendment number 4 to the agreement with Galvin Preservation Associates for coastal development and environmental support services for the Highway 101 Carpentry to Santa Barbara project segment 4A to 4E, increase the cost by $100,000 for a total amount not to exceed $650,000 with a period of performance from August 15, 2015 through December 31st, 2022. 42, approve and authorize the executive director to, in accordance with the agreement, to suspend performance and to make immaterial amendments upon review and concurrence with legal counsel.
Thank you very much. Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Oppose and abstain. Matter carries unanimously. Thank you. Ms. Contreras, could you please read item 5 into the record?
Item 5, committee appointments for 2020. 5A, appoint one delegate and one alternate to the California Association of Councils of Governments, CalCog. 5B, appoint one delegate and one alternate to the Los Angeles, San Diego, San Luis Obispo Corridor Agency. 5C, appoint one delegate and one alternate to the Coast Rail Coordinating Council. 5D, appoint one member and one alternate to the Calvans Board of Directors. 5E, appoint members to the SBCAG Executive Committee, Chair, Vice Chair, Immediate Past Chair, Chair of North County Subregional and South Coast Subregional.
And Executive Director Kern, are you making a presentation on this item, or is it just to the board?
It's up to you to go through the list and appoint members as appropriate. Thank you.
All righty, let's just start at the top of the list. CalCog, Director Sierra and Mosby, is that right?
I would like to move that Sierra and Mosby stay as the representative and the alternate.
Okay. Motion's been made and seconded. Terry, did you get the motions from? Okay. Director Hartman made the second. Director Mosby, you'd like to continue in that capacity? Okay.
Great job.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Oppose and abstain. Actually, we needed public comment. Do we need public comment on every item? Rachel, do we need public comment as a global thing, or?
Mr. Chair, yes, we do need to call for public comment, but if you just want to see if there's any comment on number 5, that would be fine.
Okay. Is there anybody in the public who'd like to speak to item 5? Okay.
No public comment?
Let's keep going then. The next one is the LoSAN delegate and alternate, and I am the delegate, and Director Murillo is the alternate, and I would like to continue in that capacity, and I think Director Murillo would as
Mr.
well.
Chair, I would stay on that.
Okay. Can we get a motion for that item? Okay. Motion's been made by Director Hartman and seconded by Director Clark. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Oppose and abstain. Next item is the delegate for the Coast Rail Coordinating Council, and I believe that is Director Murillo.
Mr. Chair, I'm the vice chair of that committee and likely to be the chair when the next time we convene. So I would ask my colleagues to keep me as the primary representative from SBCAG to the Coast Rail Coordinating Council.
Okay, and Director Williams is the alternate too, and you'd like to stay there too?
I would.
Okay, can we add that to the motion as well? Okay. Motion's been made, and was it seconded too? Did Director Andrzejczyk? Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Oppose and abstain. The matter carries unanimously. The next item is the Calvans Board of Directors, and I think we have ex-Director Julian is the representative from SBCAG. Does he want to continue in that capacity?
As far as I know, he still wants to continue.
Yeah, I believe he does.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else interested? Okay, then if we have a motion to continue his appointment.
So moved.
Motion's been made. Is there a second?
Second.
And seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Oppose and abstain. The matter carries unanimously. Thank you. And then,
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, Director Hartman is the alternate to that committee, and I don't know
Okay.
if she would like to continue in that capacity.
You're ready, though, when called upon. Well, let's add a quick little motion then, just to make that official. Could somebody make a motion
So
to?
moved.
Motion's been made and second by multiple folks. Terry, did you get them? Okay. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Oppose and abstain. Thank you. And then we also probably need a motion to appoint the soon-to-be appointed chairs of the North and South County Subregional Committees to the Executive Committee,
Correct. We haven't had a meeting to elect a chair and vice chair for each of the sub-regional committees. So in anticipation of whoever is chairs of those committees will be part of the executive committee.
Okay, so should we make a motion to
Yes,
to
please.
do that? Okay.
Yes.
Would somebody like to make a motion to make that appointment to those places? Thank you, Director Hartman. And the motion is seconded by
Second.
Director Patino. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Oppose and abstain. The matter carries unanimously. So we are done with that. Thank you very much. Next item is number 6. Ms. Contreras, could you read that in the record?
Certainly. Item 6, State Legislative Platform. 6A, receive and report from SBCAG State Lobbyist Gus Corey of Corey Consulting and approve State Legislative Platform for 2020. 6B, appoint an SBCAG Board Delegate to attend Central Coast Coalition Sacramento Lobby Day event. 6C, direct SBCAG staff to return to the board with a recommendation on the implementation of the State of California's Vision Zero Task Force after recommendations of the State Task Force are released in January.
Great.
Ms. Bianchi-Clement, thank
Okay.
you for the presentation.
Thank you. Lauren Bianchi-Clement for the record. Director Hart, fellow board members, good morning. We're excited to present to your board today the draft state legislative platform for 2020. The development of this platform is a collaborative effort within SBCAG with our Transportation Technical Advisory Committee and in consultation with our regional partners like the Central Coast Coalition, all while working very closely with our state legislative lobbyist, Gus Corey of Corey Consulting, who's with us today. Mr. Corey has been an integral member of our team since 2001. He serves as our eyes and ears in Sacramento. He is well respected by not only members of the Santa Barbara State Legislative Delegation and their staff members. I've heard this quite a lot while I'm onboarding, but also among our state agency partners. He is often on the ground, rolling up his sleeves on important decisions being made to influence state legislation or to engage state agencies to protect SBCAG's interests. I have personally come to appreciate Mr. Corey this year as I have had the opportunity to get to know him more, see pictures of his kids, and value the extent of experience and expertise on issues and topics that matter to SBCAG's success. The legislative platform before you today is reflective of your board's priority to continue to pursue funding in the second cycle of the competitive programs offered through Senate Bill 1 to complete the Highway 101 Carpinteria to Santa Barbara project. This is rooted in the board's Measure A strategic plan goal to aggressively pursue outside matching funds to complete project commitments and meet the region's transportation needs. 2019 marked the first year of Governor Newsom's service as head of government for the state of California. This year has helped provide some answers to that question mark we had for what's to come in 2019 from last year. As you read in Mr. Corey's legislative update in the fall and the latest memo included in the staff report, the first year of the governor's service was represented by a number of new appointments to state agencies that are critical to delivery of your board's priority projects, such as the California Transportation Commission, Caltrans, and the California State Transportation Agency. Through Margie Kern, our executive director, we have worked to keep your board updated on those appointments. And you'll be seeing a number of them, these individuals at the March 25th and 26th California Transportation Commission meeting when they come to Santa Barbara. So we're hoping you have all of that on your calendars. Today you'll hear a report from Mr. Corey highlighting the high priority issue areas that are reflective of the funding environment and opportunities within the context of a new administration. Mr. Corey will be providing highlights of the governor's budget that was released last week. To advance these efforts, SBCAG will be a part of the annual Central Coast Lobbying Day in Sacramento this February, and we are recommending that your board take action to appoint a delegate to attend that event. Also, to support Mr. Corey's presentation, we provided a track changes format of the platform in your staff report. Of particular note, we added to the 2020 platform the monitoring of the Zero Traffic Fatalities Task Force. This was formed by Assembly Bill 2363 and was convened by the California State Transportation Agency to work on a report with recommendations on a number of topics related to reducing traffic fatalities down to zero, including examining alternatives to the methods for determining speed limits in California. There was interest among our Transportation Technical Advisory Committee members for stronger language to support the implementation of recommendations of the task force. We understand that the recommendations are to be released this month or sometime in the near future, and added the language that we'll just be monitoring this as a result. Therefore, you will see the board action for your consideration to direct staff to return to the board with a recommendation on the implementation of the task force recommendations following their release and review by staff. So I'm happy to answer any questions at this point before I turn it over to our esteemed Mr. Corey.
Are there any questions for Ms. Bianchi-Clement? Thank you. Great report.
Thanks.
Mr. Corey.
Good to see you again.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and Directors. Gus Corey from Corey Consulting. Thank you, Lauren, for the gracious comments. I think the legislative delegation must think I'm Sarkis, to think that I'm so likable. So, anyway, congratulations, Mr. Chairman, on your new capacity. Look forward to working with you, and thank you, Director Patino, for your past service and your participation in going to Sacramento and representing the board. And we've been able to make quite a bit of headway, I think, on our priorities. I think much of what has been accomplished would not have been possible had the board not spoken in unison and given us the direction to go up to Sacramento and advocate to deliver on some huge state and regional priorities. And so we've spent the bulk of the fall trying to tee up, which I'm still trying to grapple with, is finishing the Golden Spike really on the 101 here within the county. And this was, as you know, a pipe dream before SB1 was enacted. I remember back in 2008, when we were just praying for a Proposition 1B grant for the Santa Maria River Bridge widening project. And so we've come quite a long way with getting well over $500 million invested within the corridor. And so I, along with your staff, have been making the circuit statewide and trying to influence the SB1 Cycle 2 guideline process in order to position us. This is critical because in Cycle 1, there was more capacity of funding available. For example, there's a program, the Solutions for Congested Corridors program, which funds multimodal projects within the state. That was $1 billion in Cycle 1. It's now $500 million. A lot of folks weren't ready in Cycle 1, and we had the looming threat of an SB1 repeal, which was Proposition 6 on the November 2018 ballot too. So we were fortunate enough to be ranked as the #2 project in the state at the time. And so we've been working really hard on your behalf, again, to get some language into the existing guidelines. And I'm pleased to report that the commission has taken language to put a priority on completing a corridor and then funding a project in a county with a population of less than 500,000. So that should, further help us compete with some of the larger MPOs in the state, the Orange counties, the Riversides, and others that have just a yawning list of projects and priorities. And so a couple other changes. Governor Newsom did appoint 2 people to the California Transportation Commission, Hillary Norton from Los Angeles and then Tamika Butler. Both have a background in active transportation, mode shift, type of philosophy. Interestingly enough, Commissioner Butler, whose first meeting was in October, has resigned, and so I believe the January meeting will be her last meeting. And so we've talked about this in the past. There's never been a representative from the Central Coast Coalition that sits on the Transportation Commission. And so we've been fortunate enough to have others as surrogates for us. Paul Van Kneinenberg from Modesto has been a real champion for us. He'll be the next chair of the commission in February. But we are working with the Central Coast Coalition on trying to identify somebody that the governor's office may want to consider. And once we have that person vetted, then I would work with the appointments secretary in the governor's office to try and see if we can get somebody on the commission. Governor's budget, uneventful, which is a pretty good thing. I guess it's a nice problem to have when you're flush with cash. The general fund is at $153 billion. The rainy day fund will be at $19.4 billion by the next fiscal year. It's got $18 billion for this current fiscal year. Governor's priorities are predominantly on trying to fund homelessness, early childhood development, transportation because of climate resiliency. I'll talk about that in just a second. But for transportation, because of the enactment of SB1, that's $5.2 billion on an annual basis that's coming in to take care of our local streets and roads and address congestion management issues, public transportation, passenger rail services. So the climate resiliency plan that he has, he's trying to address several different facets of our daily life. So clean drinking water, drought resistance, combating wildfires, sea level rise, coastal wetland protection. This would take place in a $4.75 billion bond that would be put before voters this November. So that's about the only thing that's really noteworthy, I would say. So all of our focus really right now is on cycle 2 and just trying to get the 101 done. For housing, he did mention, and it was quite impressive. He said a lot in 2 hours. It's the longest that I've ever seen in more than 20 years of doing this. I've never seen a governor get up for 2 hours and speak at a budget press conference. But for those of you that are expecting allocations from AB 101, so the housing package that passed last July, he said you should start getting your local jurisdictions should start getting checks as early as next month, if not by March at the latest. So just a heads up there. So with that context, shifting over to your draft for now until it's approved. And Lauren, do you want to put it up? Your draft 2020 state legislative platform. Lots of strike-throughs on this thing, and the reason why we like to do it this way is we like to show what the board has approved in the past and what changes we're making. We also have a clean version that is available for the public as well. There are 5 different issues on the platform. We don't really deviate too much from the 2019 platform. But number 1, our biggest priority, again, as I mentioned, just trying to acquire funding for cycle 2 to finish sections D and E on the 101 for the US 101 multimodal corridor. Just want to say a quick word here just to further embellish. SB1 Just going back to 2017, I'll never forget, just so the board knows, I'll never forget it. I call my eldest daughter an SB1 baby because she was born on April 4th.
That's right.
I remember texting, calling Director Hart, among others, while my wife was in labor, which was the craziest thing I've ever done. And I'm glad that I'm still married. But there literally was not an appetite other than funding the SHOP, so for maintenance of the State Highway Operations and Protection Program, and local streets and roads. It wasn't even a consideration to fund public transportation. It wasn't a consideration to give you additional resources to leverage your Measure A dollars until we jumped in and we had this crazy idea of the state should probably look holistically at our infrastructure. And so Chair Hart, I just want to thank you, Director Kern, Mr. Kochek, Mr. Luna, for all the work that you did to even have this be a conversation at this point in time. And so that's our number 1 priority for this year. I'll go through these really quickly if you don't mind, and I'm happy to take any questions. Number 2, regional partnerships. One thing that we initiated here at SBCAG was to work collectively with our sister counties along the Central Coast, so the Central Coast Coalition, going from Santa Cruz down here to Santa Barbara. And we've been able to speak with one voice and raise the awareness about making investments along the 101. And so we want to be able to continue that, given, again, competition is going to be pretty fierce going here into cycle 2. We identify a couple more routes outside of the 101 just to raise the level of awareness, 166, 154, State Route 1 as well. And then as Lauren was mentioning, we want to monitor the recommendations of the Vision Zero Task Force. The report was due by Cal STA to the legislature on January 1st. So I'm not sure if they've met that deadline, but I'm sure when the report comes out, it could be forthcoming. I'll be sure to share that with SBCAG staff and then ultimately the board so that you can better form your decisions going forward. Coordination with Vandenberg Air Force Base, this is something that we've always been cognizant of, but it's never really been formally acknowledged in our legislative platform. It's probably more of a federal issue, but nevertheless, if there's ever state opportunities to leverage any kind of federal funding that comes in, just to acknowledge our partners there, we want to be able to do that. So item number 3, transit funding reform. So wearing another hat, there was, in Stanislaus County, they have 4 transit operators there that had difficulty in meeting their fare box recovery ratio requirements. And that's because most people that tend to take public transportation tend to be folks on a fixed income. It's the most vulnerable in society, school children, seniors, and the like. And so they just weren't collecting enough. And so it was very difficult. If you don't meet your fare box, then you lose funding, which is a downward spiral of losing more funding. And so both the Senate and the Assembly Transportation Committee chairman asked me to work with the California Transit Association on a task force to look holistically statewide as to how do we address the problem going forward, given the significant investments that have been made through SB1. But this is really the transportation funding that we're really referring to. These are local funds that you generate through a quarter-cent sales tax. And so it's a little bit silly to, assess a sales tax and then not to be able to use that funding for its intended purpose, and you're having to penalize operators because they're not meeting the recovery ratios, if you will. And so we're trying to eliminate the penalties. We're trying to make sure that service stays online. So this is something that we'll be working on your behalf this year. Passenger rail service, this is obviously a big one. A little bit of history on this, working with our phenomenal delegation, in particular Senator Jackson. I recollect 10 years ago, we were looking at extending what is now the peak hour service going into Goleta. And, the reason why we passed cap and trade, quite honestly, is because we were getting sued. The state was getting sued on Proposition 1A, which was the High-Speed Rail Bond Act, and the governor needed a Plan B. And so Senator Jackson, I remember at the time, said, "Why do I care about high-speed rail?" And I said, "You probably shouldn't because it doesn't touch your district, but you would care if you could get to downtown Los Angeles." She goes, "You're right." She goes, "We need better rail service within the county." And sure enough, a program was created. It's the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program, which we've drawn from. We've had awards in order to make the improvements to the Goleta station and extend the peak hour service up there possible. So we just want to remain diligent, vigilant in our efforts to continue to acquire funding from those sources in order to make passenger rail service a reality. We're working with our partners, the Coast Rail Coordinating Council, to try to, and Union Pacific, to try to acquire more track rights, perhaps in the future, to make Coast Rail maybe more of a viable option for folks. I've always thought, this is just my personal observation. I don't know, no offense to the Central Valley. I grew up in Stockton for 17 years, but I'd rather stop here than I would at some place in the valley and just enjoy what the Central Coast has to offer. And I feel like the governor could have a viable alternative to high-speed rail if he wanted, if they were to pay attention to what our needs are here along the coast. And so, last but not least, number 5, the governor, this is sort of related to number 4 a little bit, and that's the governor's trying to take a more holistic approach to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and getting people out of their car. The Air Resources Board has been having more joint meetings with the Transportation Commission, and the governor issued an executive order on September 20th of last year emphasizing the need to, again, reduce greenhouse gas emissions and find resources to fund alternative modes of transportation. I'm pleased to say that we're already ahead of the curve. Even on the US 101 multimodal corridor strategy, we're investing into active transportation projects. We're there on the train. It's an HOV lane, so we're trying to get, more people into fewer vehicles on the road. The one thing that I think is important and new here is the administration really does have to think that they want to wean our dependence off of petroleum, and they want to convert over at some point to some other metric to handle transportation. And if it is a vehicle miles traveled way of doing business, I guess, or collecting money, I think we're at a disadvantage that way. We're sort of beholden to where the jobs are located, and we've talked about this. Director Hart, you were there last year when we met with Governor Newsom, and we tried to pitch him there to say, look, the travel patterns are going to be dictated to where the jobs are, and even if you shoehorn more housing into certain areas, you have to build the infrastructure, whether that's more rail service, or if you want folks to convert over to electric vehicles, you have to build more charging stations. You have to get rid of range anxiety. It's got to be more affordable for people to actually want to convert over, because there's a reason why half the cars in this state are worth less than $5,000. That's what people, they're paid off. Those cars are probably paid off, and that's what people can afford to drive around. And so there's a much larger conversation to be had here, and I just want to make sure that we're not left in the lurch because the administration wants to think that, it's just not a cookie cutter issue. If you live in San Francisco or Los Angeles, we're very different from those two metropolitan areas. I want to make sure that we have a seat at the table to have these types of conversations. And so that, in a nutshell, is our proposed legislative platform, and I'll stop right there and see if folks have any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Corey, for the excellent report. Are there questions for Mr. Corey? Director Lavanino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Gus, it's amazing how people's perception of you changes when you deliver $430 million, huh? Not that it ever changed. We always knew you were doing a great job. I'm just curious, on cycle 2, what is our outstanding investment? What are we asking for?
Defer to you, Director Kern.
We will be asking for between 100 to 150 million.
Oh, okay.
Just another 100.
Okay, very good. And that decision gets made at the end of this year?
Yes. So the applications are due end of summer or in the summertime, and the decision will be made on December 2nd at the CTC meeting in 2020. So mark your calendar.
Yeah, and the CTC, as you may know, is going to be coming here in March, so that's a phenomenal opportunity to showcase our projects. Had I known that they were going to keep moving the deadline further, I would have had them come a little bit later, but I think, they'll be pleased, and they're familiar, and they are looking forward. The commissioners that I've spoken to are looking forward to coming down here and seeing the progress that's been made within the corridor.
And we're going to have a ribbon cutting and a groundbreaking at the same time, so that will be memorable for them. So
Yes.
I appreciate that. Director Williams.
So, obviously, the idea of getting stronger rail through here is something a lot of us have worked towards and hoped for many, many years. But I want to understand, are you saying that there really is a path to an alternative here on the Central Coast, or a path to leverage whatever that rail is in the Central Valley to for a share on the Central Coast, which are two very different things? My understanding is the minds behind this look to the Central Valley because that's where the largest population growth is, and we're not exactly densely populated here. I think a lot of our perception of what the Central Valley is based on the 5 corridor and not the 99 corridor. If you jump over to the 99, there's massively populated places now pretty much in the entire Central Valley. So tell me in a more realistic rather than just hopeful sense, what's our angle here and what's the potential?
Sure, absolutely, Director Williams. You may recall from your tenure in the legislature some of the conversations that were had about high-speed rail, and I will tell you, I was a Assembly Transportation Committee consultant back when Prop 1A was being discussed about being placed on the ballot. It got punted on twice. And at the time, high-speed rail was supposed to be a $30 billion project. So a third was supposed to come from the state, a third was coming from the federal government, and a third was going to come from the private sector. I think there was a major miscalculation with assuming that the private sector was ever going to put a penny in until all the risk was absolved, for one. The change in administrations, federally too, that's even less support. Here, stateside, the appropriation bill passed. The bond is $9.95 billion for high-speed rail. What sold the legislature on approving the appropriation was the .95. The .950, the $950 million, that went to fund existing systems, Metrolink, Losan, BART, Caltrain up in the Bay Area. And so the plan now, while the governor has scaled down the project, if you will, is to build it from Merced to Bakersfield. What do you do once you get to Bakersfield? You're either going to take a bus to go somewhere. They're going to try to either bore through the Tehachapies, or you're going to take a dog leg to go all the way out to Palmdale and then link up with the Metrolink system to get back into the LA basin, if you will. And so I see it as two things. This is just me, my speculation here. I don't think they put much thought into rail service along the coast. The reason why they started in the valleys, they thought that it would be geographically, it is easier, it's flat, it's straight. They overestimated how expensive and time consuming would be to acquire those parcels. And so I think there's an opening with Union Pacific to have a conversation. At least what I've heard from other counties along the Central Coast. And so it's something worth exploring. So I'm tempering, I guess, my expectations until we really have the authority to go out and pursue this as a priority for the board and to make sure that the region is on board, but it's relatively new. So one thought that I had for this year is working with the Coast Rail Coordinating Council is to have somebody along the coast drop a resolution, introduce a resolution to highlight the significance of why you would even want more robust rail service or rail service along the Central Coast. And it's just having a resolution passed through both houses just to kind of raise our profile, I think would do wonders and make it more of a conversation. So maybe that's the first step. But maybe sitting again, if the governor's willing to sit down again on February 19th to have a conversation, we might have more information at that time to make it more of a realistic consideration, could be an opportunity. So I don't know where it goes, but to me it seems like it's an easier win, it's more cost effective, and it's probably more attractive for California residents.
Well, that's a cause for a certain amount of optimism and a certain amount of hope, and I like the sound of it, and I definitely think it speaks to the fact that our success on the freeway and our happiness about the level of success on the freeway should be somewhat tempered by that our promise on rail is only partially fulfilled. It is not fulfilled.
Right.
And obviously that should also speak to what we have to do as alternatives and what we have to do to make that promise be fulfilled. So I, for one, think it is a high priority.
Any other comments or questions? Well, thank you, Mr. Corey. That was really provocative, and I like the idea too. I think the idea of higher speed rail on the coast as a viable alternative and a place for investments to make the connectivity quicker, faster, and more comprehensive between San Francisco and Los Angeles. And we benefit tremendously along the Central Coast from that strategy, so that makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely.
Is there any other public comment on this item?
We have no public comment.
Okay. Ms. Bianchi-Clement, did you have something you wanted to add? Okay. Is there any more board discussion? How about a motion?
Mr. Director, so just really quick on, because there's 3 action items before you.
Mm-hmm.
So just very quickly, most are familiar, but the lobby day that I put together on behalf of the Central Coast, which is, we've had several of you that have participated in the past. We're doing it a little bit earlier this year. We typically go up in March. We had the one exception 2 years ago because of the applications for SB1. We're doing it a little bit differently this year, just so you know. So we typically meet with some folks in the administration. Sorry, I haven't had my coffee. And then we meet with our legislative delegation. We're not going to meet with our legislative delegation this year. We're going to really focus, just given the different irons in the fire that we have with the Air Resources Board, Strategic Growth Council, the governor, CTC, Caltrans. There's a new director there. We're going to focus the trip on the administration, if you will. So if folks are interested, we'd encourage, and we've had more than one member show up in the past, so I'm happy to accommodate folks there along with staff.
So that's to your point about item B, appointing a delegate to attend the Central Coast Coalition Lobby Day. And that's item B. Are there folks who would like to attend and participate and join us in that effort?
Is it usually the chair?
I think in the past it has been the chair, but there have been other people too in the past. So if folks are interested, I think we can expand the delegation to as many people as like to go. I would like to go. Anybody else?
I would like to go.
Director Patino, thank you. Is there anybody else? Maybe Director Sierra, we should ask her if she's also interested in coming. We have the vice chair too. All right, well, can we get a motion then to that effect?
So the motion would be to accept the report, ask Chair Hart and Mayor Patino to go, and possibly Mayor Sierra. And then number C is to ask staff to return to the board with a recommendation on Vision Zero. So I would make that motion.
Thank you, Director Mura. Motion's been seconded by Director Andrzejczyk. Any comments to the motion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Oppose and abstain. Thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Corey, for a great report as always.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members.
Next item on the agenda is item number 7. Ms. Contreras, could you please read that into the record? Or is it, yes, item 7.
Yeah, item 7. Item 7, Federal Legislative Agenda. 7A, receive a report from SBCAG's federal lobbyist Don Gilchrist of Thomas Walters and Associates on federal transportation issues and approve SBCAG's federal legislative platform for 2020. 7B, authorize the SBCAG chair, vice chair, and immediate past chair to travel with staff to Washington, D.C.
Ms. Bianchi-Clement, welcome back.
Great, thanks. Yes, for the record, Lauren Bianchi-Clement, Director Hart, fellow board members. It is my pleasure to also be very excited to present to you the draft federal legislative platform for 2020. This development of this platform was also a collaborative effort within SBCAG, the Transportation Technical Advisory Committee, as well as consultation with regional partners such as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency's legislative roundtable statewide, all while working closely with our federal legislative lobbyist, Don Gilchrist of Thomas Walters and Associates. So Mr. Gilchrist has been involved, great member of our team since the early 2000s, so predating Gus Corey. He has been our voice and our ears in the nation's capital. He's well respected by not only members of the Santa Barbara Federal Legislative Delegation and staff members, but also has a number of connections throughout the Capitol Hill to influence and support your board's priorities. Of note, I had a privilege of working with his agency for a decade while I was with the County of Ventura, and it's been a privilege of mine to come full circle and get to work with his agency again here at SBCAG. I have come to value his collaborative efforts to keep us informed and seek our input on opportunities or areas of concern for SBCAG priorities. The draft federal legislative platform before you today is reflective of your board's priority to continue to pursue funding. We do this through an annual federal appropriations process, a multi-year federal transportation reauthorization process, that would be lovely, and administration's proposed infrastructure initiative or any other federal sources. As with the state legislative platform, this is rooted in the board's Measure A strategic plan goal to aggressively pursue outside matching funds to complete commitments to meet the region's transportation needs. In 2020, seeking innovative financing options remains a priority, with the goal to support alternative financing tools that help provide access to needed capital to deliver Measure A project commitments and meet the region's transportation needs. Sarkis Kachek is leading and navigating the federal process on the Infrastructure Finance and Innovative Act, also known as TIFIA, application to receive credit assistance for Highway 101 HOV Carpinteria to Santa Barbara project. We added an additional financing option to the platform this year, and that's the National Infrastructure Investment Corporation Act of 2019. I'm trying to eliminate acronyms.
Thank you.
That was introduced by Congressional Representative Carbajal to set up a national infrastructure bank to leverage private and public dollars for local government projects. This legislation has been referred to the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, on which we know that our Representative Carbajal serves as vice chair. Through Mr. Gilchrist, we are advocating for and staying diligent to ensure that SBCAG's priorities and interests are heard in Washington, D.C. Today, you will hear a report from Mr. Gilchrist highlighting the challenges and opportunities from 2019 and what is possible for 2020. To advance the board's federal legislative priorities, SBCAG will be a part of a legislative advocacy trip on March 30th through April 1st. This aligns with advocacy efforts of the California Regional Transportation Planning Agencies, also in Washington, D.C. at that time. It is recommended that the board authorize a delegation consisting of the SBCAG Board of Directors, immediate past chair, current chair, and vice chair to travel to Washington, D.C. to meet with the federal legislative delegation and transportation agency officials on behalf of SBCAG's priority issues. To support the presentation today, we provided track changes format of the platform in your staff report. Of particular note, in October, your board approved the addition to the 2020 legislative platform to coordinate with the Santa Barbara Metropolitan Transportation District on efforts to eliminate and mitigate the loss of funding for small transit intensive cities that exceed the formulas population threshold following reclassification following the census. That has been incorporated into the 2020 platform, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions.
Are there questions
Turning
from
it over.
Ms. Bianchi-Cullen? Thank you for the good report.
All right,
And Mr.
thank you.
Gilchrist.
Good morning, Chair Hart, members of the board. Don Gilchrist with Thomas Walters and Associates. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today about your federal platform. We did provide a written update. I believe that's been given to the board, and I'll be fairly brief in summarizing some of the things that happened in 2019, as well as a few of the things that we see of interest this year. If I can, perhaps, would you mind? I apparently cannot do this. So in 2019, just a few bullet points. It started out a little bit rough. The federal government was partially shut down due to some funding disputes. Although the government did open in late January, those underlying disagreements just persisted throughout the year, made it a very difficult year. And with the result that the appropriations process was not completed until late December, which is not ideal. We did have a budget agreement in August that set the overall spending limits for 2020, but it still took Congress and the administration the rest of the year to figure out how to allocate that money. The transportation funding bill was included in a consolidated appropriations package that was signed into law on December 20th. And we included some details about specific funding levels for programs in our report. I can go into that, of course. Basically, it was a rough year, but it ended pretty well for transportation funding. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. 2019 also saw some progress on surface transportation reauthorization. The Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act is a multi-year authorization of highway, transit, rail, and highway safety programs that we rely on for the support of the transportation programs that are important to SBCAG. The Senate Environment and Public Works Committee kicked this process off in August by approving S2302, the legislation that they're calling America's Transportation Infrastructure Act of 2019. This bill only authorized the highway portion because that's the jurisdiction of that particular committee. It proposed to increase funding for these programs by 27%. So this is just the first step. We need action by other committees as well. But it looked to me like a fairly good first step on surface transportation reauthorization. And of course, SBCAG is also pursuing credit assistance for the 101 project through the TIFIA program. Your staff has made tremendous progress on that in 2019, and this is an issue that's going to be carrying over even more into our advocacy program this year. So in terms of the FAST Act reauthorization, this is so important for SBCAG. I think the action by the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee to approve S2302 in August will give us a little bit of a head start as we head into this year. The legislation expires in October 1, and so we want to see that multi-year authorization come in on time so that there's no interruption in these programs. Unfortunately, the Senate committee has not identified how they're going to finance this transportation spending. And essentially, the revenues that we're seeing come in from motor fuels taxes that are being deposited in the Highway Trust Fund are simply not sufficient to support these programs as we head into the next reauthorization. So that's going to be a fairly significant obstacle to overcome this year. Next slide, please. This chart, I think, illustrates pretty well what we're talking about. The Highway Trust Fund shortfalls will be increasing over time as we move into the next reauthorization. The Senate Finance Committee has jurisdiction over this part, and they would have to identify about $100 billion to finance the amount of spending that the Senate EPW Committee was proposing for a 6-year bill. So that's a fairly significant number for them to come up with. As we look at what the House is likely to do this spring, we'll see the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee make their own proposal, and I certainly expect that to be even more robust and aggressive than what the Senate's suggesting, which is great news for our programs. But it just makes the trust fund problem that much harder to overcome. So this is something that we'll have to work on this year. The next slide shows a little bit more on appropriations issues. These are two programs that are some of the key ones for you. And the blue bar shows the level of funding that was authorized by these programs by the FAST Act. And the FAST Act had steady, modest increases for these programs. These programs are supposed to be funded out of the trust fund under the authorization that they received in the FAST Act. And what this chart shows in the yellow bars is what was actually enacted by Congress. And so you can see that beginning in 2018, Congress and the administration agreed to add general fund supplements on top of the trust fund spending, which has been great to increase the overall funding levels for these programs. I just mentioned this as we move into this year. We want to see this continue. This is really, really helpful. But it's also something that we're going to carry over into our reauthorization message, that this is the new normal. This is what the baseline is now. Don't just look at the FAST Act, but let's build on what Congress has been willing to do in these bills. So just in 2020, we're looking forward to continuing to work with you and your staff on the platform that you'll adopt today. I think TIFIA credit assistance is going to move higher up in the priorities and what you're working on, we want to see this brought to a successful conclusion this year. And all the feedback that we've been hearing from the Build America Bureau is that the information that is being provided to them by your staff is satisfying all of their questions, satisfying all the concerns that they've raised so far. We expect to see additional questions and briefings in the future, but so far so good. Your staff's doing a wonderful job on that. We'll be including this in our meetings that we plan for board members and staff in Washington, D.C., and also our own direct advocacy with the agency. The BUILD program, infra program, these are 2 additional grant opportunities for you to apply for funding for the 101 project or any other priority projects that you may have. I don't see this as at all in conflict with what you're doing with TIFIA. I think they work well together. I would think that this may actually cause your grant applications to be more competitive and more attractive. So that's great. Transportation appropriations, the reauthorization are both really important issues for us this year to protect and increase the transportation programs that you rely on. And I included climate change. I think that's going to be a really big issue, especially in the House this year. We're going to see some comprehensive climate change bills voted on by the House of Representatives. Unfortunately, most of them will not be taken up by the Senate this year. But in the reauthorization realm, I do think that's an area where we're going to see some things happen on climate change. And what we're looking for there is, can additional resources be brought to bear to fund projects that help address greenhouse gas emissions or reduce vehicles miles traveled? So that could be a very good thing for transportation programs such as an HOV lane or other types of things. We are recommending that board members and staff come to DC in March, and I think that'll be a great time to weigh in on these issues. And throughout the year, we'll continue to work with your staff and you on any other opportunities that we see come up. So I'd like to wrap it up there, and I can respond to any questions you may have on our written report or what I've said this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Gilchrist. Appreciate the report and your great work. Are there questions for Mr. Gilchrist? Director Mosby.
Yeah, real fast on your item number 3 in coordinating with Vandenberg Air Force Base. It says will collaborate. Is that taking a leadership role? Is that following behind? Is there something new coming down the pipe? In my discussions with some of the people at Vandenberg, they don't truly realize the infrastructure in the surrounding area, that they're bringing propellants across bridges and highways and stuff. And there was a plan I mentioned to you last year in the late 70s when the MX missile project was coming potentially out there, of huge amounts of money coming in to fix the outside the area infrastructure. So is there just, do you know of anything, or are you just?
I would say, first of all, Vandenberg is a regional resource that we have always been mindful of in our advocacy for this area. And I would say there are very few meetings that we have where we're asking for people around the country to help our region that we don't bring up Vandenberg. And so I think this year we're raising it perhaps a little bit in terms of the types of things we're focused on because of the potential for additional traffic. That's a slightly different argument, and we're going to be looking for those resources. I'm aware of some programs. There's a Defense Access Roads program out of the Pentagon. It'd be great to get some money from a different agency than the Department of Transportation, wouldn't it? So, unfortunately, that program is fairly small. I believe there's probably other programs that we may be able to identify. I do not yet have that information. So we're going to be eagerly seeking different sources of money. I wonder if this type of a project or argument would be competitive nationwide in a build or an infra grant application. It's quite possible that they would see the national and the regional significance of such a project.
I know internally on the base itself, they spent tens of millions of dollars on projects, upgrading, updating, which kind of, if you can't get to the base, what do you got?
Right.
And in the past, it was a movement to fix the outside infrastructure as well. And MX missile fell through, so it didn't happen, but the Central Avenue component that was happening before was primarily to bring the propellants into that area as opposed to bringing them on the 1939 bridge, which is what they're doing now, and bringing it right through downtown, the heart of downtown. So maybe advancing and moving, in the forefront of Vandenberg and without saying it this way, but I will, holding their hand to bring them to the table, so to say.
I understand, absolutely.
Any other questions? Director Patillo.
I know that as a city, when we've gone back to DC to lobby, we go to the Pentagon and speak to whomever we need to speak to there. But it's really, I think it's really, I don't know if you have that planned or not, but they really don't know where like Lompoc is or Santa Maria is, and yet the impact with the new Department of Space, we're going to be right there. So just a question of whether or not we're going to be meeting with anyone at the Pentagon.
That's likely. I've done meetings at the Pentagon. The disadvantages with the level of security and access issues, as you can testify, no doubt, it does chew up quite a bit of your day. It can be worth it. So if there's a way to do a meeting in California on this, it would probably be better. One of the things I'm thinking is as people around the nation wrestle with closing of bases and consolidating of forces, it is not unusual for forces to be moved from this area to this area and cause a local base to swell and having a huge impact on infrastructure. So we're going to be examining how those areas have responded to that and seeing if we can mine that for our approach.
Thank you.
And then may I add to that is just this having this in our legislative platform and codifying it will enable us to work collaboratively with Vandenberg Air Force Base so that we can identify ways that they need help, that we can kind of make those connections for those meetings in DC as it works for Vandenberg too. So it's just making those national connections for us and for our projects.
It does seem like the rebadging of Vandenberg Base as a Space Command facility makes it more visible nationwide. There are fewer of those than there are Air Force bases, so
right.
that draws attention just naturally. I really appreciate Congressman Carbajal's leadership in creating the National Infrastructure Investment Corporation, or trying to get that going. What is the distinction between that and the TIFIA program? Is there both similar financing mechanisms, but is there...
It all helps make the pot bigger. An infrastructure bank tends to try to attract a funding investment from outside of the federal government, pension funds, for instance, things like that, and help leverage it with federal funding to make that amount of lending authority much larger. So it could make the pot significantly larger. I think it's going to be, one part of helping solve this big problem of how do we pay for transportation infrastructure in this country.
That slide that you showed that showed the deficit in the Highway Trust Fund was really compelling. When you think back to the original federal gas tax in 1932 and it being solvent for 90 years, and here we are in the moment in history where that we're $100 billion deficit.
It looks like
basis.
it. Yeah.
I mean, that just
maybe
really,
higher.
Really speaks to a broken system, and that we need to fix that at the federal level. And the state has shown the way that we can do that, and
many
folks
states
that.
have.
Yes, thank you. Is there any public comment on this item?
There's no public comment.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Gilchrist, for your great work and your report.
Thank you.
Can I get a motion? And we have the same situation as the previous item where we have authority under B to authorize the chair, the vice chair, and the immediate past chair to travel with staff to Washington, D.C. to press our case for funding for our projects.
So moved.
Motion's been made. Is there a second? Motion's been seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Oppose and abstain. Thank you very much. The matter carries unanimously. And that brings us to the next item on the agenda, which is item number 8. Could you please read that into the record?
Certainly. Item 8, Santa Barbara MTD Microtransit Project. Receive an update on Santa Barbara MTD's planned on-demand curb-to-curb microtransit service pilot.
Ms.
Mr. Chairman,
Blackerby, are you
Chairman,
gonna
I'd like to
present
introduce
this?
Hillary Blackerby from MTD to give the presentation on the microtransit project. And thank her for coming and giving this presentation to the board.
Welcome, Ms. Blackerby. It's always great to see you, and thanks for sharing this great information about the program.
Thank you. Good to be with you all, Chair and members of the board. Here today to talk about an exciting project that we're working on. It's a pilot project, so we'll see how it goes, but wanted to just kind of explain what's going on with microtransit, what it is, what it does, what we're hoping to do with it, and provide some context of what's going on in other communities on this. First, just as a quick background, most of you know Santa Barbara MTD is the public transit provider here on the South Coast from the Ventura County line up through western Goleta. We have, last fiscal year, we had 6.4 million passenger trips in a year, and on a standard weekday, we carry over 21,000 people. So you see the buses around, and they've got a lot of folks on them. Our ridership is up this past year, and we're continuing to work towards increasing that, but making sure that we have a good, reliable service for members in our community. And as we address all the climate change impacts, both your federal and state representatives mentioned, a big part of that is getting people occasionally out of their cars and into other modes. We also we have 80% of the transit ridership in the county rides MTD buses. We're really proud of that, but we are also happy to partner with our other jurisdictions in the county. That's the good thing about transit. We don't compete with each other because we don't generally overlap. So it's a very generous industry in sharing best practices. So microtransit, there's a lot of buzzwords and, a lot of things right now, but in transportation, you've probably heard micromobility and shared mobility and all those different things. Some people use them differently. Micromobility is sort of, scooters and bikes, kind of bike share type thing, which I know the county and some of the other jurisdictions have grappled with. Shared mobility, that sort of gets used in different ways where it could mean you're sharing a thing, so like a scooter or a bike, more than one people, it's not one person's own thing, but it's sort of an asset that the public can use in a shared manner, or shared mobility can mean a shared ride, okay? So this is an example of a shared ride, what microtransit is. So it's flexible, it's on demand, it's curb to curb instead of just on a fixed route at bus stops. With a smaller vehicle, we're looking at using, we have on order for this pilot right now, 4 transit vans, so they'll fit 7 ambulatory passengers and have 1 wheelchair tied down, so they'll be ADA accessible with a lift and ramp. They serve a specified area or zone, what we're calling a microtransit mobility zone. And I'll show you later what our first run at it's going to be, what that area will be. And it's 1 flat fee per trip, so there's no surge pricing, it's not based on distance. The zones are generally fairly compact, but we basically have a way, and I'll talk about the technology a little later, to make sure that it's still public transit, right? So we want to make sure that it's accessible to folks, but it is a little more of a premium service than just a standard bus. So what isn't it? It's been in the news that we're going towards this pilot. I've run into a lot of people in town and they go, oh my God, it's amazing. This changes everything. And it is amazing, and we think it will change some things, but just want to be clear what it's not a replacement for, right? And so we have a lot of high-performing fixed-route bus services, so especially in Isla Vista, we have sometimes, a 60-foot articulated bus that has, over 100 people on it, right? We're never going to replace that with microtransit, right? I said this thing's going to hold 8 people. It's going to be dynamic. That's not a replacement because you can do the math of how many vans you would need to carry that same number of people. So it's not a replacement there. And like I said, it's not a good way to move a bunch of people all at once, right? But what we do think it's good for is in areas that are underserved or unserved by transit or unconnected from other points, that we think it will be a good opportunity to get people out of their cars and moving and have a pretty easy experience. The way that the technology works, well, first, how we're funding it. So we got an allocation through one of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund sources. It's a Low Carbon Transit Operations Program, LCTOP. We applied for funding for operations for a 1-year pilot. And so that's the one that we're working towards right now. Working with a company called Transloc. They're owned by Ford Smart Mobility, and they are the software provider and helped us do the modeling and simulations for our sort of use case zones. So how does it work? That's what the van looks like. Or it'll have a lovely wrap on it, but that's the shape of the thing. So we supply the driver and the vehicle, right? We're procuring the vehicle. The drivers, this is different than other ride-hailing applications where our bus drivers are trained and background checked and, held to very high standards and know how to work with the public. When you are requesting a ride, so if you're within this zone, this mobility zone, there's one of 2 ways you can request it. You can use a smartphone application. It's the Transloc app. You open that up. You say, I'm at this point. I want to go to this point. Those points being within that zone. And then it'll tell you, okay, your ride will be there in, 8 minutes. So they know where you are. They'll pick you up there. You'll know also about how long it'll be till you get to your destination, and then you're on your way. You pay through the app. Another way that we're providing, accessibility in this way, if people don't use smartphones, they'll be able to, during business hours, call our transit center, and our customer service representatives will help them book a ride. Excuse me. To at a particular time or that, but it's on demand in a way that it's not. You don't have to call a day in advance or something like that. It can be on the fly, which is, as we've seen with the change in transportation technology, that there's obviously an appetite for that in the community. So that's how that piece works. The pilot that we've selected is in Goleta, and I will show you in a moment what the sort of boundaries of that are. We took a look, we had Transloc model 3 different areas because we wanted to see what's possible and if this goes well, where we might expand out to. We looked at a particular part of Goleta, which we ended up selecting. We looked at Carpinteria, sort of the city of Carpinteria and including Santa Claus Lane. And then we looked at city of Santa Barbara, waterfront and mesa area with a little hook into drop zones in the funk zone near the train station as well. So one thing about the zones, you can set up kind of a polygon on a map of, between these streets, this is where we pick up, but you can also select specific points where if you're in this area, this is the point you have to get picked up at, right? And that can help kind of focus rides and make it more efficient. So essentially how it works is when you pull out your phone and request that ride, the software is showing the driver on a mounted iPad turn-by-turn directions of where to go to pick up a person, and then once they're picked up, where to go to either drop them off, pick someone else up. So it optimizes it based on where they are, where the requests for service are, and optimizes that way. So if it goes well, right, you will be sharing rides, but it's possible that instead of just, okay, I'm going to pick you up and drop you off, and then I'll go get the next person and drop them off. Sometimes if you're along the way, they'll pick someone else up. You might be going to the same place, right? So that's sort of the structure of how it works. And I'm going to show this map. So I'm going to zoom in here. So the colorful lines are fixed route lines that are in those areas existing. And I'll just show you roughly where the boundaries of this Goleta zone are. So over here on the right is Patterson Avenue. The 101 is the big yellow thing at the bottom. So that's the boundary there. So Patterson over here, Cathedral Oaks to the north, and then over here is Los Carneros. So everything within this grayed box is in sort of the largest part of the zone. What's in here? There's a lot of residential. There's 2 major senior living neighborhoods, so Maravilla and also Encina Royale. There's the Goleta Library. There's several grocery stores and shopping opportunities. There's several schools, junior high and a couple of elementary schools, parks, Lake Los Carneros. So we felt like there were a lot of trip generators, and it's a pretty compact area, which helps make it successful. This is the other little piece of the zone. So basically, if you go over Los Carneros, there's all this new housing development here, right? That wasn't there the last time, fixed route was changed, and so don't have any service except for a booster to the junior high that goes through this area. And so you've got a ton more housing. You also have all these business park areas over here. There's a couple craft breweries here and there in these zones. And so we think that's a really good opportunity. And so that goes to Hollister. It doesn't quite go to this intersection. As you might imagine, that could really slow down your vehicle, but it would go as far as this Hilton Garden Inn that's on the corner there. And then I mentioned the extra points, the drop points or pickup points outside of the zone. We have 3 of those. And so Santa Barbara Airport is one here. The Goleta train station, let me zoom out. Goleta train station, right here. Sorry, we have 4. The North Hall bus loop at UCSB, and then at an existing MTD stop along El Colegio Road here at El Colegio and Embarcadero Del Mar. Now, why didn't we just include all of IV and every bit of campus? Well, if you're understanding how this works, you probably know that the vehicle would never get out of IV, right? It would be completing trips there constantly, right? And we really want to connect those points at Isla Vista and UCSB over to that area and back. We've had requests for many years, like there's no way to get in one seat to Trader Joe's, right? We get asked that by students. We get asked that by the folks who live at Friendship Manor, the senior living community in Isla Vista. That's a big request. And, the airport and the train station, those are obvious trip generators that sometimes maybe people don't want to take all their luggage on the bus with them, though people do every day on the Line 11. But this gives them an opportunity to take kind of a more direct route. So that's the zone that we're looking at. The timeline on this, we've put in our order for our vehicles. We attempted to find, at the time when we were procuring these, a zero-emission type van. While those are available for order now, they weren't when we ordered, and so we have ordered these with diesel engines, and we now, as of the beginning of December, are running on renewable diesel, which is significantly less emissions impact than petroleum diesel. So that's what they'll be running on. It's actually a cleaner, it's less emissions than if you're using a hybrid gasoline vehicle. So we're excited to do that. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Blackerby. This is really an exciting project. I'm obviously thrilled. It's in my district. I know Mayor Perotti and the city of Goleta shared that enthusiasm. Director Maria.
Mr. Chair, thank you. So, Ms. Blackerby, did you say that this is a model found in other parts of California or the country or the globe, maybe? Or are you trailblazing with something like this?
We're not the first, certainly. There are several active pilots or sort of full-fledged systems at this point in California. Sacramento was a real early adopter, Sacramento Regional Transit. There are a few in LA. Orange County's had one for about a year and a half. Throughout the country, they're trying it. You know, it's in other jurisdictions, it has different applications. So some places they have kind of a legacy like dial-a-ride system, and they replace that with this, and they've seen a lot more trips, which is great. In some areas, they are, you know, sort of from us, we're putting it down in an area where there is some fixed route, but maybe not into the neighborhoods. But there's several different applications. Some of them, you know, Seattle's doing it. Some of them, they do a pilot, they see, wow, it went gangbusters in this neighborhood, but this one, it didn't really work, right? So it really is a test, and it's something that we're able to not adjust on the fly, but make changes to as we go. But it's really going to be a learning experience.
And marketing, I imagine older people who aren't used to apps and stuff, you might want to try to get them to understand what a great opportunity to get around that area.
Absolutely, yeah. So once we know when we're getting our vehicles, when we have a start date in mind, and you know it'll be in 2020, we will, you know, launch that. We're working on branding the service and getting it out to people, because we already know that especially in that area there's a big appetite for this.
Director Hartman?
Oh, finally, I wanted to say, Mr. Chair, so I'll find out if we can do a little PSA for you on City TV. I think we broadcast or cable cast all over the place. I'll find, even though it's not City of Santa Barbara, we'll see if we can help.
But they could always hop on the line 7 and head out there and then get to any of those points. We haven't set the fare for this yet, but we're looking at probably about $3. We would have a half fare for seniors over 62 and over and people with disabilities, so it'd be $1.50, pretty killer deal. We're also looking at having there be free transfers to our fixed route service.
Director Hartman?
Thank you. That was I have a couple of questions, and that was one. So it's really much cheaper than Lyft or Uber. Exciting. Yeah. And wheelchair access?
Yes, there's a position for, there's a lift and ramp. The sliding doors of that van come open, and then there's actually a thing called a slide-in step. So it's a lift that slides out into the doorway and comes down ramp, and then lifts the wheelchair up. So there's one position for wheelchair in there.
So that'll be really great for, especially for retired or older citizens. It's curb to curb. Mm-hmm. My final question is, how will you assess success for the pilot?
That's a great question. So ridership is obviously a piece. With this software, it's really, it gets very granular. And so we can see kind of a heat map of where the big, kind of requests for service are, what the biggest trip generators are. Maybe there's an area of the zone where it's like one person a week. Maybe we can carve that out and then become more efficient. So there are a lot of things we're looking at to see how it goes. If we're oversubscribed, if we look at, standard trip time and, wait time and trip time, that's what the simulation model looked at, of estimating what they think would happen. And they look at, okay, well, what if you had 50 requests for service. What if you had 100? What did they take it up to 400 of, like, basically try to break it, to see, like, okay, now people are waiting 45 minutes and it's not, it doesn't make any sense. So we're hoping we don't get to that breaking point, but we'll be assessing all along, and thankfully we have a lot of good analytics through the software that'll help us do that.
Just a final question. Do we have a benchmark for cost recovery, or is that a piece of this, or we're going to be learning about that as we go?
Yeah, we're gonna learn about that. Different agencies are seeing different things. Obviously, it's higher than our standard fare, and we do have operating funds from LC Top for the first year. So we'll see what it looks like, but yeah, we don't quite know yet.
Director Lavadino?
Thank you. Well, I like the idea of getting people out of the bigger buses and getting into smaller things at demand, but I'm struggling with how this differs from like Uber Pool. So what's different than me going on the app and saying I want to go somewhere, and I don't mind stopping along the way and picking people up. Mm-hmm. So is it kind of this? It sounds like the same thing.
Kind of. I mean, obviously, there's the obvious differences of this is public and it's a lot cheaper.
Well, we don't know that yet, though. We think it.
Well,
based
on what people are paying in other cities that have Uber Pool, we don't have, as far as I know, Lyft Line or whatever they call theirs now, and Uber Pool we don't have a big enough population really to support that, is my understanding. But it is on demand, and with this, it's in a specific zone, so you're never going to get, your driver's not going to be in Carp and you're waiting for Mingolita.
One of the things that occurred to me is, there's similar experience to an airport shuttle where you're going and another passenger may be added to the trip. If there's a way to have the app kind of tell you that and to even give you, like real-time travel information as you're a passenger so that you're not surprised and you can kind of psychologically prepare yourself, that would be a great thing. I don't know if that's part of the design.
So it shows you where your driver is, and it shows you, this is actually interesting. At first when this was explained to me, I was like, oh, what's the point of that? And they explained, you get shown when you request the ride, it tells you how much time you're probably going to wait, and that adjusts and optimizes. As soon as you're the next pickup, that's when you see the vehicle on it. And I thought, well, that's interesting, but it's actually a privacy issue, right? Oh. So that you won't know where the person who's on with you got picked up, right? Yeah. So I was like, wow, that's really smart, and probably a lawyer made you do that. So that is, so that's interesting. But yeah, you'll be able to see, they're not going to detour to pick someone else up when they've told you they're coming to get you, if that makes sense.
They're not. Yeah. So it's not a situation where you're
so it's kind of a queue.
Van. Okay.
And there may be while you're on, there may be a call that's on the way to where you're going.
Right.
So it doesn't really take you out of the way, I guess.
So it's literally on the way. It's not like you're going to detour a few blocks even.
I mean, maybe a few blocks, but it shouldn't add significant trip time. Yeah.
Well, it's very exciting, and congratulations on doing something innovative and fun and exciting. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Any other comments or questions? Is there any public comments on this item? Okay. And I don't think we need a motion, do we? Just thank you for the report. And thank you, Mr. Estrada, for being here too as well.
Thank you. And we'll give you updates as we get closer to launch and invite you out to check it out.
We'll help with the publicity too. Thank you.
Thanks.
Next item on the agenda is item number 9. Could you please read this record? And I believe Director Williams has to recuse himself from this item. So we'll see you later.
Item 9, Highway 101 Carpentry to Santa Barbara, segments 4A to 4C. 9A, receive an update on the implementation of the Transportation Management Program components for the Highway 101 Carpentry to Santa Barbara projects, segments 4A to 4C. 9B, authorize the usage of Regional Surface Transportation Program funds for costs associated with the implementation of the TMP components for the Highway 101 Carpentry to Santa Barbara projects, segments 4A to 4C.
Mr. Luna, welcome.
Yes, well, Happy New Year and good morning, Director Hart and board members, directors. So I'm going to give you an update today to follow up on a couple things that transpired at the end of last year, specifically in November, where we did a presentation to the South Coast Subregional on the transportation management program for the Highway 101 project, the 3 segments that have been funded and are going to be implemented within a few months for at least the first segment, and then following that, the remainder of the 7 miles. And then our board workshop, where we talked more specifically about our implementation strategy going forward. Just moving on, these are the 3 segments. So I think it's significant to point out that these 3 segments that we got funded in Cycle 1 are 7 of the 10 miles of the corridor. So we're moving forward with that. This chart I kind of modified to what was presented at the board workshop, but I think what you want to take away here is that in April, as you've heard, we're going to be starting construction in segment 4A, so in Carpinteria. And then later in the year, we'll be starting construction in October in segment 4C. And then right in next summer, it hasn't yet been solidified as to the start date, but next summer, segment 4B will be starting construction. So they will all, in about 18 months, they will all be under construction in the corridor. And so obviously that's a very important reason why we need to implement our transportation management program in the corridor. Just to the right there, we've kind of indicated when our forecast completion dates are for ribbon cutting ceremonies. So. And that just gives you an idea of the timelines and those.
Speaking of timelines and things, next time you come, I think you should have a graphic that describes the end date of the Linden and Casitas Pass project, because I believe we had a friendly wager between Director Adam and Executive Director Kern about whether that project would be done on schedule. Do you recall this? All right, well,
We have it on tape.
Something just to be prepared for in the future. So, Director Adam.
I will defer to the tape.
Sorry to interrupt you there.
No, that's fine. So just on that note, we are scheduled to finish that in the spring, the Linden Casitas project.
Got it.
And so that is ahead of schedule. I think originally, the original plan was at the end of 2020. So just as far as the 101 TMP and pre-construction activities, today I'm just going to cover the TMP, but I also wanted to inform the board of some pre-construction work that's going to be going on in the corridor, commencing this month and continuing. And this is really like mobilization work that's going to be going on, setting up construction offices, doing some tree trimming. So you may see that work going on in the corridor. That pre-construction work will actually commence this month in Carpinteria in segment 4A, and then in the other areas in the county's jurisdiction, those will continue in February. And the reason for that is that we're next month, or later this month, and then probably early next month, we're waiting for our coastal development permit from the county of Santa Barbara. So we're waiting until that has been obtained. Outreach in segments 4A and C. So our public outreach consultant, Ayers and Associates, along with SBCAG staff, have commenced our outreach in the corridor, talking to stakeholders and informing them of the work that's coming up. Last week, we were at the Carpinteria City Council to inform them of the work that was going on in the city of Carpinteria. We're looking to also update our SB road site. That's the go-to site for information on Highway 101 as far as all the segments that are going on. So that'll be updated starting in March. And then we'll have a construction brochure that'll be released for segment 4A in March as well, to kind of describe the improvements in the corridor. And this just gives you a flavor of the TMP programs that are going to be implemented. As is mentioned previously to the board, we share in this with Caltrans. Caltrans is our partner. What we bring to the table are the things that SBCAG in its core does as on a regular basis. So it's I've partnered with Ken Epperson and Scott Spalding to work to develop the programs in concert with Caltrans. And so Scott's here today if there's any questions about some of the transit programs as he's been working on those. So on SBCAG's column, we're looking at public information. So in the past, our model has been that SBCAG's taken a leadership role in hiring a public information consultant to represent Caltrans and SBCAG in the corridor, and that will continue. We also have the responsibility to implement a freeway service patrol program. And so the way it relates to the Highway 101 corridor is we augment that with a construction service program that's specific to those areas that may not be served by our regular program. And then we add to that so that if there's any recurrent congestion or incidents that happen in the corridor, those can be addressed by that construction-funded program. And then demand management solutions, those are implemented by our Traffic Solutions Division, and I'll get into some of the specifics about that. And then in the Caltrans column, one of the most significant things that Caltrans implements is their contract with the California Highway Patrol to have a presence out there during certain operations, nighttime activities, just to make sure that the work zone remains safe for both the traveling public, but for the workers and other folks traveling through the corridor. So as I mentioned, I'm going to jump through just some of the key components that SBCAG is going to be implementing on the public information side. We will be continuing our service with Ayers and Associates. A recommendation will come to the board in February for a contract amendment, and then their work going forward to implement the public information for the funded segments. As I mentioned before, this includes the elected official outreach, media, and stakeholder updates, and so that'll be ongoing. We've already developed detour maps, construction updates, and website updates, and those will be populated on the website, as I mentioned earlier, which will go live in March, those updates for Segment 4A, and then follow on as the other segment material is ready. And our standard practice is to do regular email updates to people that are in the work zones, and so that'll continue, and that'll commence with the work as it starts in April in Segment 4A. And then we continue to coordinate with local agency staff on a regular basis. This has been an effective way to meet with the local agencies on a monthly basis and anticipate issues. And I know Director Hart, in his previous role, had participated in many of those meetings, sitting down, anticipating issues that may be coming up on local streets, or and then coming up with Caltrans with strategies to how to, in advance, address those. Transit components. So there's 2 slides here to talk about 2 independent programs or services that will be implemented. The first one is a service between SBCAG and MTD, and this looks to implement a new service from Carpinteria to serve Santa Barbara City College. It's characterized by 2 peak hour trips, morning and afternoon, and then 1 midday trip. And it'll initiate with a 2-year pilot, starting with that. And if there's any details about that, like I mentioned, our Director of Transit, Scott Spalding's here. And then the second program that Scott's been working on with our partners down at Ventura County Transportation Commission is a TMP-funded Coastal Express service to new areas that aren't currently served by the Coastal Express. And direct service to UCSB, you can see the bullets, Upper State Street, and some of the goals are reduced trip times from Camarillo and Oxnard. The idea would be to repurpose surplus Clean Air Express coaches, so I think that affects maybe the timing, but Mr. Spalding can certainly address that, and the idea there would be a 2-year pilot program. And then on our traffic solutions side, Ken Epperson will, as he's done in previous projects on the Highway 101 corridor, implement the freeway service patrol and be the contract manager for that. And I already touched on that. This has been effective in our Muscle Shoals work and our Linda Casitas projects previously. We also have carpool incentives. A couple of new things that we're doing with this project are we're looking at funding a shared workspace to get people to go to a hub to work and refrain from commuting into the commute shed, because the whole goal is to eliminate trips through the work zone. Also partnering again, this was effective in the city of Carpinteria with our partners at Coast and SB Bike to work with them on bike education, and then doing some e-bike demos, and Kent has all the specifics about that. So transit incentives with MTD and VCT service as well on the previous transit programs that I mentioned. So these are the budgets and the budgets here are for all three segments. So your board has seen a cooperative agreement for segment 4A already, and that was approved in December. We will be coming back to this board for separate cooperative agreements with Caltrans to fully fund all the remaining programs in our commitments for segments 4C and 4B going forward. The idea behind it, though, is that we're one of the recommendations today is that we're asking the board to authorize the use of the RSTP funds, the 101 reserve funds, to directly fund those programs so that we can get them started in the quarter. Because our approach is that they'll all be implemented. All the 7 miles will be initiated fairly soon. So we wanted to look at a holistic approach for the whole quarter and getting people through the whole quarter, not just the Carpinteria area or the Summerlin area. So here are some milestones related to the pre-construction work. I mentioned this before. There will be some tree trimming and removals in the Carpinteria segments beginning this month and then continuing in Padaro and Summerlin in February. We'll also be preparing construction support sites. That means putting the trailers in that'll support the contractor's work efforts and other laydown areas where they're going to be storing materials or stockpiling materials that are going to be necessary to build the project. That'll commence in March to June timeframe. With the start of construction in Carpinteria in April, and I mentioned before, Summerlin and the Summerlin segment in October, and then next summer for the segment in the middle at Padaro. So it's upcoming actions. I mentioned the contract that will be presented to the board for the Ayers and Associates. That'll be coming next month. There will also be an MOU between SBCAG and MTD that'll be coming to the board next month. And then our arrangement for the transit services with VCTC is perhaps March, but that's currently an estimate based on some details that are still being worked out. So today's action for the board is to receive this report and then authorize the use of the RSTP funds to fund the programs that SBCAG's implementing from the 101 reserve. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Luna. Are there questions for Mr. Luna? Are there any public comments on this item? Director Clark,
thank you.
Question.
Thank you for your report, Fred. Can you refresh my memory where the RSTP funds come from?
The SBCAG gets a regional share. That's state-only funding. I think it's approximately $3 million a year. And this board has, by decision, reserved those as for the Highway 101 project. In September of last year, the board further took action to utilize up to, I think it was $42 million. So this would be one use of that $42 million that the board's previously authorized in September.
And so if that money didn't go to 101 stuff, where would that money have gone?
It's a fairly flexible source of money that, because it's state-only money, it has a wide number of uses, but others can, I think it can be used for a number of different transportation type improvements.
Yeah, it could be used for projects eligible under Article 19 of the state constitution, which is basically all transportation-related type projects that do not include operations for transit. That's the only limitation.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Director Adam?
So are we taking that and using it for operations of transit then?
That's a good point. We'll double check on that. So.
Well, that's what it's.
Yeah.
That's what you're proposing, right?
Yeah, it's Article 19 of the state transportation. So we'll double check on that. So if it's not eligible, we'll follow up.
So
on that.
you're withdrawing the request at this time?
Well, I'm just thinking that this is part of the mitigation for the Highway 101 project. So the fact that it may be in under a different definition of of implementing a project. So I would have to double check with the state to make sure that that's
Well, maybe our
correct in my-
council has an opinion as to whether you can divert funds that are specifically precluded from being applied to that purpose for mitigation.
Mr. Chair and Director Adam, it's something I need to look out further. Yeah, my understanding was that the funds were already designated for the Highway 101, but not specifically for this purpose, and so I'll check on that.
So you're withdrawing the ask at this time?
At the board's discretion. Components, certain components are not transit funded, so if they can't act on the entire recommendation, I imagine we can come back with more information next month. We'll be bringing additional items related to this, as I mentioned, related to the public information contract. And as Director Kern was indicating, these are typically characterized as construction capital, and so when you're funding it, they're associated with the mitigation or what you're doing to implement that project. But we'll look into what programs can be funded specifically with this source of funding.
So the motion could be to approve the use of the RSTP funds for the non-transit related components, and then we could come back and have additional information and have that other piece acted on next month.
Yeah, because we've already reserved, I mean, I don't know, I don't know why we would need to do that, because it would be recommitting it to the same purpose that it's committed to right now, right?
Yeah, it is. It's just the distinction of the specific use for the transit funding that's at issue.
Right, so we wouldn't be doing that at this time until we find out.
Well, I think the challenge is that they would like to go ahead with the things that are not related in the timetable, and I don't think there's any question about those things, and there is just a question about the transit-related expenditures, which aren't on the same timetable, so we have.
Correct. The anticipation would be we would implement the transit components in August of 2020, so we'll come back to the board on the transit components, if that's okay with the chair, to exclude the transit components in this recommendation, and we'll come back to the board to clarify that, how that's going to be paid for, because operation and maintenance is not eligible under Article 19. So, good question. Thank you for catching it.
Yeah. Is there any public comment on this item? Did I already ask that?
We have the public comment.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from
So,
directors?
Mr. Chair, how would we fashion the motion then? What were you saying?
Well, it looks like we have A, that we can do, and we can authorize the use of the RSTP funds for the costs associated with the implementation of the TMP components of the 101 project, with accepting or carving out the transit components, the transit projects. And so it would be authorizing everything but the transit components, and then staff will look into that, and then we'll have another item at a future date that answers that question.
So moved.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the catch, Director Adam. The next item is our 10 1-minute reports. 10 1-minute reports. Does anybody want to volunteer to start? Director Murillo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start with a housing-related announcement. Thank you to Michael Becker, the planning director here with SBCAG, for working with a group of people in the city of Santa Barbara to develop a housing project under the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program. Thank you. We called on you. It was a brainchild of the League of Women Voters. We have APCD there as well, because it's a program. If you're making the air cleaner and reducing commuting, then you get points for that. We're working with some downtown property owners and nonprofit housing consultants, and we've been having 3 meetings now and working with the city of Santa Barbara, so that might be a success, and maybe we can let everybody else know how well we did. So, Mr. Becker, thank you so much for helping with that. We're looking forward to getting funding for our big bicycle project, MODOC to Las Positas, and that would be for recreation and commuting. So that's a big corridor in our city. Looking forward to that. We're also implementing other projects related to our bicycle master plan. Not making everybody happy, taking away some on-street parking, but if you're accommodating bicycles and trying to get people out on their bikes and cleaner air, better for the planet, we're implementing our bicycle master plan. Proud of that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Director Mosby?
Recently in Lompoc, we've begun and initiated a reduction of approximately 10% of our jobs housing imbalance with the 42 new businesses that are coming to town in underutilized and vacant buildings. So I think that's one of the significant, probably the largest movement in the private sector of jobs in Lompoc, probably the history of Lompoc.
Congratulations.
And proof that a minimal tax component will stimulate and help to stimulate jobs. And thanks the county for taxing the way you do, because it's driven the business to Lompoc. Thank you.
Director Adam, do you have anything? Director Williams?
We are doing a host of, our Public Works Department doing a host of street repairs, particularly in those streets that have been damaged by the trucks to remove debris or to empty out the debris basins over the last 2 years, starting in as soon as the rainy season stops. And we just got a FEMA grant for the Ashley Road Bridge, so that should be in a couple months. That's the first of the FEMA grant applications that's come back in as an affirmative. And then we're doing a temporary bridge over mountain where it crosses Cold Springs that was washed out in the debris flow and is impassable to all those but the most able. And by putting a temporary bridge, it will facilitate that for bicyclists, pedestrians, and God willing, equestrians.
Thank you. Director Patillo?
Yes, this may not be as exciting for some of you as it is for us, but United is coming to Santa Maria. We'll have a flight out of Santa Maria to Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Denver. And those flights will start June 4th. And so we had probably about 150 people, would you say, Mr. Lavanino? There at the terminal, everyone from elected people in government, people from the schools, and private and industry. And so it's really exciting for us because it wasn't too long ago that United did pull out and people are having to drive north or south, but this way, and they can park free in Santa Maria. It's not like Santa Barbara or San Luis Obispo. So we're really excited about that. Thank you.
Director Andrizik? Director Levanino? Director Rucaba?
Yes, we are continuing with our resiliency plan. We just met last week, Thursday, to go over our subcommittees, because we have subcommittees with that we created out of the resiliency plan. Also, we had a Spanish-speaking outreach, and there was about 80 people that showed up to that. So that was really a wonderful outreach that we had. So we're just really excited about building our resiliency plan. We are getting into the nuts and bolts of it and really trying to just focus on how to keep Guadalupe resilient.
Thank you. Director Hartman. Okay. Next item up is Executive Director's Report. Director Kern?
Director Clark have anything to?
Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. Director Clark.
Thank you for asking. I've got nothing to report today.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chairperson, members of the board, Happy New Year. 2020 is going to be a great year. We are kicking off our regional transportation plan and sustainable community strategy and the regional housing needs assessment. So a lot is going to be coming before you. In addition to that, we are also going to be applying for the final funding, hopefully, knock on wood, for the 101 project, and we'll be successful at the end of this calendar year. So I'm looking for some really good news coming, or actions coming to this board for all those things. We did, staff and others participated in a one-room, many voices training session by Just Communities this past week. It was a well-attended training. I think we had
30 or 40 folks, or, yeah. And it was a packed house, all various jurisdictions, city, county staff, MTD, Air District, nonprofit agencies participated in that. And basically, it's making our meetings and our outreach more accessible to those who do not speak English, so, and how to do that and how to go about that. So that it was a great training for us. Last night we had our workshop on the Gaviota to Guadalupe Trail Study, and again, that was a well-attended. Getting people out to come to public meetings seems to work in Santa Barbara County. 25 folks showed up to that, and it was a great discussion on where we're going with that study. And last but not least, you're going to hear this again and again and again until March 25th, but we're having an event on March 25th with the California Transportation Commission. We're going to kick it off with a tour of the 101 project at 9:30 a.m. And then the meeting will start at around noon, I think, 1 p.m. For the commission. And on that agenda is a lot of things happening for Santa Barbara. We have several allocations, including the Las Positas MODOC allocation, among others. And so we expect to have a lot of local participation in that meeting. The evening is at, reception is at 5:30. We hope you all attend and be social with our transportation commissioners. A great chance to rub elbows with them and talk about what we have going on in Santa Barbara County. It will be at the Santa Barbara Maritime Museum, so we'll give you a link to that, to RSVP. And then, last but not least, is our ribbon-cutting groundbreaking event for the Linden Casitas project and the starting of 4A. And it's never been done, as far as I know, in the history of our transportation, to have a ribbon-cutting and groundbreaking simultaneously, just moving on to the next phase. So I'm excited about all this, obviously, and I hope you are too. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Director Kern? Director Harton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Will you be reporting back to the board from your one-room many voices and some of the conclusions about how we can make, be more accessible to the...
Absolutely, we can do that. And especially in our sustainable community strategy outreach, that was the intent of the training, is to get us all up to speed on what we can do to get more non-English speaking voices in that process. So we'll bring that back to the board so you can get input on that.
Is our website, can you click a button and get it in Spanish?
No, not at this point in time. So yeah, we have a ways to go, and I think it's going to be a process. We're going to improve this year, and we're going to continue to improve as we evolve as an agency. So thank you.
Is there any public comments on this item?
No public comment.
Okay. Next is the Caltrans Director's Report, and Ms. Persons is going to make their report.
Thank you. Good afternoon, almost. I'll make this quick. I just wanted to update on a couple projects that are underway. I appreciate Fred's, all the information he provided about the 101 project. The couple things that are going on right now is on Highway 192, the Toro Bridge is now open to two-way traffic. Some of you may have heard about that, yay! And striping is going on this week, so that's kind of the last part of that project, and then all the bridges along that route will be completed. Along Lompoc right now, there's a maintenance project going on Highway 246 at Highway 1, so there's a portion of the roadway that's closed right now, and that's hopefully going to be done by the end of the week. And the third emergency project that, as we know, I drove by it this morning, the Turnpike southbound on-ramp, the sinkhole. If you haven't been by there yet, it's quite amazing how big the hole is now to try to repair that to get to the pipe that needs to be replaced. So the expected opening for that to be completed is February 3rd. So for now, there's obviously detours going on around that. There was a workshop in Guadalupe on the downtown mobility and revitalization plan on Sunday. There was a very good turnout for that, and so that is wrapping up of that plan. So the Local Government Commission is the lead, working with the city on developing that plan. And the one last thing I wanted to mention, which just recently occurred, is the governor issued Executive Order 23-20, and this has to do with addressing the homeless issue in California. It's provided direction to a number of state agencies to look to how to work with the local cities and counties on how to address the homelessness issue statewide. And that's the end of my update.
Director Hartman, did you have something?
I had two questions that come from my constituents, and one of them is with Director Rubalcaba as well. That one has to do with the Pasadero development and getting across 166, and that's really critical to integrate that new community into the city as a whole, and roundabouts are not at least what the neighbors want there. And can you look into that and just see what the process is? Because people are having to get in cars really even to get to, what's within walking distance. And so a process and how that connection will be made. I think it came up at the workshop you mentioned on Sunday, but I promised I would bring it forward to you today.
Okay, so looking at what is the connection between the Pasadero community and the downtown connectivity?
Yeah, to get safely across 166 there.
Okay.
And the second question I have, and maybe others with state highways through downtowns may have it as well, but this is for Los Alamos, and the Business Association very much wants to have trash cans. They would make the wooden framework, and then they'd have a trash can in, and the county is able to actually arrange to have them picked up, but it's in the Caltrans right-of-way. And so the question is, what is the process to get approval for that?
Okay, I can look into that. It possibly would be through an encroachment permit, but we'll look at other opportunities for how to address that.
Okay, and it would be for the whole street, so we don't want, and the businesses would kind of take care of it, so we want to consolidate permits if we can.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? With that, our business is concluded, and we are adjourned to the next board meeting on Thursday, February 20th, beginning at 10 a.m. in Santa Maria.